From the tropical island of Trinidad and Tobago, modern philosopher Nestor Alexander posted a question that resonated with people from all around the world. A simple question, but one that taps into some of the deepest insecurities of humanity as a whole. What is love? Oh baby, don't hurt me no more. And every single one of us has asked themselves a variation of that question when time comes to pick up a new harem manga. Please don't let this one be painful. Please let me just have some fun and enjoy myself. Why is that? True, this may be a more uncommon situation if you are relatively new to the world of harems, or even just to romance manga in general. The more seasoned amongst the rest of us will know what I'm talking about. The memories of the volumes worth of nothingness, regression, and misunderstandings, or filler the likes of which would turn even the most avid Naruto fans into a sobbing mess. The more jaded of the bunch would interpret the shortcomings of the medium as a necessary evil, something you've got to accept. You've got to take the bad with the good and all that self-deluding nonsense. I don't feel so constrained. I believe that you should be able to recognize the flaws and the shortcomings of the media you like, especially in the ones you love. Always remember, the real cynics are the ones who tell you everything is alright. I'm Said Valroa, and today we are here to discuss the modern biblical plague that is the writing of a majority of modern harem romances, as well as a little piece of corn in the heaps of industry manure that is the 100 girlfriends who really love you. So, harem rom-coms. Let's break that down into more easily digestible parts, shall we? Let's tackle romance first. If you pardon the wordplay, I love romance. Being able to see the growth of two characters as they get closer together is something I deeply enjoy because it's one of the best things anyone can experience. Which is why I'm baffled by the severe underrepresentation of relationships in manga and anime. Now, your first instinct may be an eloquent, "What?" Just a cursory glance at the front page of your favorite manga site will show you dozens of series with a romance tag. On a good day, you can probably find half of the front page filled with some variety of romance. So, what do I mean by underrepresentation of relationships? Well, simply put, very few of those romance stories are about romantic relationships. Over the years, I've noticed that a lot of stories about relationships tend to focus on the period leading up to a relationship. The infatuation, the leading on, the dancing around the issue, and the many misunderstandings before a couple finally gets together, and so on. And hey, that's a lot of fun. There's a lot of enjoyment to be had out of the sometimes awkward, always tense moments that lead up to the forming of a relationship. That being said, why is it that so many stories close the book once the couple gets together? Why is the forming of a relationship treated as the end goal rather than the relationship itself? Again, there is nothing wrong with stories dealing with the chase. That is fun, adorable, and has led to some of my favorite stories. I just wonder, why are there so few people who actually write stories that go beyond the initial stages of a relationship? Because that's all it is, it's just the beginning. It would be as if you bought a house and then felt satisfied because you stood under the main doorway. It would be as if you bought a car and then left it in the garage forever. It would be like killing someone and not bothering to desecrate the corpse. The period before a relationship, leading up to getting together, it's great, yes, but it's nowhere near the best part. Of course, I have to address the elephant in the room. The obvious reason, the one that should go without saying. Many people have never experienced a relationship and don't know the first thing about how a real relationship works, so they just emulate the same couple gets together stories we've been getting from novels, movies, television, and of course, manga and anime since we started consuming entertainment. That statement holds no ground, and it doesn't take a genius to know why. All storytelling, even if somewhat steeped in reality, involve a certain element of fantasy, a creative use of imagination from the writer's part. If I've never been in a relationship but have the yearning for it, and I want to write a story to deal with those feelings, I'll obviously have to use my imagination, with the foundation of whatever I know about love from pop culture as well as my own environment. Therefore, I take some characters I like and set out to write a story in which they'll find love after many hardships and they live happily ever after. How wholesome. Now let me ask you something. Does that person we described not fantasize about what comes afterwards? Do they not think about actually being in a relationship? The dates, the time together, and everything that comes later? I once had a heated argument with someone who maintained that writing relationships was boring and that romance was all about the chase. He was completely serious. And again, it's easy to dismiss that kind of opinions as belonging to someone who's never been in a relationship or who has never loved anyone, and another myriad of justifications. However, are they entirely wrong? Because there is evidence to back his claims. Again, take a random sampling of romance manga. I can assure you that for every story about a couple being a couple and expressing their affection as a couple, you'll find half a dozen A and B get-together stories, and probably several dozen harem romances. Why are we as a whole so enamored with the getting together but seem to think it's all over the moment the relationship actually starts? We are constantly fed this stream of stories about a guy meeting a girl and the many roadblocks they overcome before they get their kiss at the end, and then they were happy and ate partridges. Can you really blame the people who think that's all there is? The chase has a clear beginning, middle, and end. It's a self-contained story with a very standard structure, which makes it a good template and a starting point. But if all you see for years are that kind of stories over and over again, it prevents you from seeing beyond that. But then we have a genre of manga where romance is not as egregiously bad. I am of course talking about the admittedly bland romance in battle shonens. Yeah, you can almost hear the collective screeches of Ichiruki and Narusaku shippers in the distance. But that is my point. Battle shonen is first and foremost about the action and the adventure, but they attract the most fervent and rabid romance aficionados this side of yaoi fangirls. Why is that? Well, there's not just one reason. I postulate that the main reason is precisely because romance isn't the focus in this type of stories. There must be structural reasons as to why stories framed as romances aren't usually romantic. If you have a story where you have two or more characters and the focus is them falling in love, then it will inevitably have to rely on the framework beat down and cracked over decades of generic romantic storytelling. The same story beats and tropes, the same character archetypes. However, if you have a story centered around, I don't know, a prophecy or a grand journey or some concrete tasks around which the world and the characters are built, then you end up with more fleshed out individuals and relationships. And when someone who's used to consuming generic slop sees a not necessarily romantic relationship that's deeper than the water in a toilet bowl, you can't really blame them for going a little crazy over it. This is also true about love itself in a more general way. Just like a pot won't boil while you watch it, love won't bloom in direct sunlight. It's harder to fall in love by thinking about falling in love. Attraction, sure, but not love. Love happens when two people find an enjoyable dynamic between them, a way they complement each other that is specific to them, a chemistry that neither would have with other people, no matter how better others may seem on the surface. And here is where we find what is, in my opinion, the first sin in all of romance writing: fuzz. What do I mean by that? Well, some scholars actually define fuzz as an element of motivation that the author was too lazy to supply. The word somehow is a useful tip-off to fuzzy areas of a story. Somehow she had forgotten to bring her gun. Somehow they had found themselves responsible for organizing the school trip. Somehow he arrived at a strange town at dawn after leaving his home. And when applied to romance, fuzz is the hastily scribed excuse to the question, why are they in love? If you've had the opportunity of reading fan fiction, particularly the bad kind, you are familiar with the phenomenon of fuzziness. It's the, whoa, where did that come from, that happens when someone gets their first inklings of romantic feelings for someone else. On the other hand, if you ask that same question to someone who likes a popular ship of any random battle or sports manga, they'll answer with something along the lines of, "Of course MCQ is in love with Rival-chan. They've known each other for years. They have similar goals and constantly try to one-up each other, and every time they interact you can tell there's more than yeah, etc, etc, etc. Sure, a good bunch of those are just rationalizations based more on headcanon than actual canon, and a feedback loop created by echo chambers that are fandoms. However, you can understand the core principles that attract some people to certain pairings. The common ground, the dynamics, the general chemistry that characters may share. And that is the key. Character. For a romance story to feel romantic, it's not enough for them to tell character A that they like character B. They have to tell the audience why character A and B are in love. And to achieve that, A and B have to be actual characters who behave in a somewhat realistic manner. And herein lies another issue with romance writing. More often than not, the characters in these stories are written to be archetypes before they are characters. What does that mean? It means that rather than coming up with characters with clear strong points and flaws, goals and desires, and well-rounded personalities, a majority of authors default to thinking of archetypes, a pile of clichés and tropes in the shape of a person. Now, I'm gonna make a daring statement. Statistically speaking, if you're listening to me right now, you are most likely a man. You mainly read stories aimed at a male audience, written more often than not by men. So let me use an example from the other side of the road, a common archetype found in romance stories predominantly written by women for women. The enigmatic and enticing loner, the delinquent with a heart of gold, the sociopath with an affinity for vulnerable women, the one and only, the bad boy. You know what I'm talking about. And no, this is not a why do women only date assholes situation, because everyone can understand why someone would be attracted to them. He's hot, mystifying, can probably juggle your ovaries from the inside with his dick, and he is powerful. But why would anyone be in love with this douche nozzle? To most men, it's baffling, because you know at least one guy like that. If you had a little sister, this guy would be the excuse as to why you keep her tied in your bedroom. You know, for her safety. And yet, the problem with the bad boy isn't that he is an asshole. It's that the people writing these stories want a rich, powerful, and mysterious love interest. And the easiest way to present such a character is to make them assholes. It's not just bad writing, it's lazy writing. He is an archetype before he is a character. So let's roll back to romance aimed at men. More often than not, when we read a romance story, the love interest is created first and foremost to appeal to a certain demographic. A story about a tomboy who secretly wants to be treated like a lady, a tsundere who will eventually become less violent and more loving, the girl with a cold demeanor who will eventually thaw. These characters are created by crossing items on a list.
But Said,
You exclaim, your broken voice echoing in your room devoid of warmth and love.
that's not always the case. Furuya-chan from Genetica Ramukamu isn't like that at all. Sure, she started as a Genki brown tomboy who was childhood friends with Kapuya-kun, but she is a nuanced character who—
Yeah. Listen, I'm not saying that this type of writing can't lead to well-rounded characters. What I am saying is that lazy writers will take the archetype and make that the full extent of a character's personality. Think of your favorite male-centric romance stories. If you were to describe the girls in those series, you would inevitably fall back on stereotypes. She's the shy one, she's the onesan, she's the legal lolly, etc., etc., etc. One reason is, well, because it's easy, yeah, but the more general reason is because characters who are created archetype first hardly ever break out of the confines of that category. On a matter of personal preference, I despise 99% of tsunderes. And not just because I don't like being beaten up. I don't like their personalities, their behavior, or the predictability of their arcs, but even they are better than the vast majority of other archetypal love interests, because their very nature implies a transformation, going from mostly tsun to mostly tere, even if that arc can be reduced to a switch being flipped with modern tsunderes. Other archetypes don't have that. Their natures are boiled down to immutable props, never going beyond reacting to whatever comes their way before the status quo is restored in the next chapter. The shy girl will react with shyness and sometimes have moments where they learn to stand up for themselves before they go back to being shy when confronted with anything the following chapter. The bold and brass girl will be boisterous and proud until they are faced with a humbling event that teaches her to be more modest and considerate, but never in a way that makes her stop being bold and brass. Because if you let the characters change, evolve, and grow beyond the limits of their archetype, you lose the demographic to whom you are appealing. That is why romance can develop in action, in good slice of life, and even in other types of stories that don't focus on romance. But romance comedy stories need to keep the status quo. They need to preserve that dynamic. They need the characters to remain within those boundaries. They can have their own dreams and goals and work throughout the story to achieve them. They need to act in a way that serves their core characterization, because the story has to be milked for all it's worth. And no genre exemplifies this more than the harem. It's not as if you can't tell a compelling story with archetypal characters who only react to each other and the world around them in a stagnant environment. But once more, this drives home what is an even bigger flaw of the stereotypical harem comedy. They were not interested in telling a story. They just want a sandbox where you can throw a bunch of toys and smash them together until it's time to go back home, only to do it again the following day. Nothing else, nothing more. You want the audience entertained, engaged, but you don't want them to think too much. You don't want them mentally stimulated. You want to split them into groups, each rooting for their favorite girl. Divide and conquer. And to achieve this, to preserve this level of stagnation and non-progress, you come back to what we discussed earlier. Fuzz. Filler without substance. Bland characterization. Inoffensive developments that can be reset a chapter later. But even that could be forgiven. It doesn't matter if the characters are bland. It doesn't matter if the setting is contrived. It doesn't matter if the progress is non-existent. None of that matters if we at least can get what we are here to get in the first place: romance. But we hardly ever get that. And here is the biggest problem of the writing in the romance genre. There is a phenomenon common in rom-coms. In fact, it's common in all sorts of media involving romance. Now you know what I'm talking about. I am of course talking about ass. At some point or another, one of us has innocently picked up a manga to read, hoping to find some nice romance, only to be confronted with ass. Ass seemingly went from a writing crutch to a cornerstone of badly written romance, to the point that you even see it budding into otherwise well-written stories. Let's discuss ass a bit more in depth, shall we? Ass, of course, stands for Alien Shipping Syndrome. It refers to the phenomenon where chemistry does not occur through shared interests, personal magnetism, or personality traits, but is instead instilled by parasitic brainworms. It is the sadly common scenario where one or both characters in the ship act as if some presence has forced its way into their mind, and it's tearing down the wallpaper of their memories and personalities and repainting it with something different. Thoughts that had never occurred to them pulse into the forefront of their brains and refuse to leave. The very logic of their worldview seems to shift, a schizophrenic delusion where everything suddenly makes sense. Physical symptoms include stammering, pondering, long introspective monologues to reach obvious conclusions, blinking in confusion, inability to grasp obvious hints, dramatic shifts in personality to accommodate a new naive personality, and frequent blushing. The non-joke description is that these characters aren't in love, they're just going through the motions. They act in love by following a series of tropes and clichés repackaged from other media. If you have been exposed to a lot of badly written romance, it may be hard to recognize ass in the wild.
Zoe-chan blushed when she watched Ribbon-kun fall downstairs and managed to simultaneously land on his face and on top of the principal. Of course she's in love.
And when more and more people are subjected to this kind of writing, it becomes normalized. It gets harder to recognize as a negative because you think this is what it is. You get an audience who think it's okay to have characters who embody just the one trait. It's okay to have no development. It's okay to have love and romance replaced with malevolent brain slugs. So, why does this happen? Why do so many writers default to writing ass? One theory I particularly enjoy is that these authors have confused love with validation. In this context, love isn't a special connection with someone else. It's a pat on the back that tells you you are worthy of being loved. You are wanted and desired. The basic dynamic of these crude relationships isn't that the protagonist is excited because the love interest wants them. The protagonist is excited because the love interest wants them. Forget about chemistry or shared traits or compatible personalities. What matters most is how both are willing to be in a relationship with each other. That's it. It's not about the qualities of the relationship. It's about what the relationship represents. Once more, it's not about the relationship. It's about what it represents. Safety, acceptance, validation. It's shallow, it's dull, but it's the kind of thing that appeals to young people with a bad track record on love and whose brains haven't fully developed the part that controls empathy. And here is where we sink into the silver lining in the Category 5 hurricane that is modern romance writing. The 100 girlfriends who not only love you, but really, 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 really love you. So, is this it? The fabled messiah? The savior of the harem genre? The one promised to deliver us into the land where anime is real? No, not at all. Far from it, really. 100 Kanojo is just a good manga. What makes this series stand out is that it's not a good manga because it avoids all of the problems I mentioned earlier. It is not a subversion or a deconstruction of harems. It's special because it embraces these tropes and clichés and takes them to their extreme. where a parody would take these elements apart and mock them or play coy about their execution, 100 Kanojo is a pastiche that proudly wears them for all to see. Let's start with the base premise. Rentaru is a down-on-his-luck guy who can't seem to find love despite wishing it dearly. So, here comes a quite literal Deus Ex Machina in the form of a love god, granting him 100 soulmates. On a surface level, this doesn't sound too different from the premise of any sort of harem manga, bearing the quantity of the girls. Every man MC has a normal life until an event leads to him being surrounded by a plethora of boobalicious girls. The key difference is that 100 Kano's premise overrides several of the problems I mentioned before. There is no beating around the bush about whether the MC and the love interest will get together or not. Upon their introduction, each girl is incorporated into the family. As a result, there is no fussiness either. Everyone firmly acknowledges that they're in love and openly show their affection. Not only that, but we know this isn't just surface-level attraction. We are shown how Rentaru has a natural chemistry with each of the girls. You can feel how certain aspects of their personality complement each other. The basis of their attraction makes sense. What about the girls? Are they merely reactive, archetypal characters who do not operate beyond the boundaries of their tropes? Yes. So much so that even their names announce what their gimmick is. Just reading a list of the names will tell you who's the quiet one, who's the drug-dependent one, who's the motherly one, who's the gentle giant, and who are the maids. What is nice is that, once more, the girls own up to these limitations and take their absurd characters to the extreme, to the point where a lot of the comedy is derived from the often nonsensical ways these girls interact with each other. And of course, there's the matter of our main character. Rentaru is, in my opinion, what really makes this series stand out. He's not perfect, but considering the bar is so low the devil uses it to play Limbo, he may as well take over the love god's job. Whereas the average harem rom-com protagonist may be so dense as to make Helen Keller look like Daredevil, and whose views on women would make the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages cringe, Rentaru is a pretty swell guy. And don't confuse this with being nice. Being nice isn't a quality, it's the base standard for a normal human being. A healthy relationship can only work between two people who consider each other equal and have a basis of not just attraction, but also shared interests as well as some measure of respect and admiration. In real life, we all want to be loved for who we are. But if you're a bland piece of wet cardboard, not only will you not get attention, you will not factor into anyone's radar. If you want others to acknowledge you, you work on being the best version of yourself. You work out, you pick up hobbies, you expand your horizons, you learn new skills. You work to make yourself someone attractive. And in the genre of harem comedies, you'll be hard-pressed to find someone who's worked harder than Aijo, man amongst men, Rentaru. Not only has he pushed himself to his physical and mental limits, he continues to find ways to improve himself, just so he can be a better boyfriend. He's gonna make sure that no matter what kind of girl comes his way, he's gonna be prepared to make her happy. If a new girlfriend comes with a niche interest in wood carving, he's gonna personally regrow the rainforest just so she'll never run out of wood. If she has a shock encounter with a girl with a terminal disease, you bet your ass he's gonna fight the Grim Reaper and kill death itself before he lets anyone get in the way of their happiness. His sheer determination and desire to put his girlfriend's happiness above all else makes Aijo Rentaru not only a shining example of what other main characters should be, but also someone who should motivate us to better ourselves as well. Because if we can get to be the kind of person whose personal betterment is driven by a desire not to appease or appeal to others, but to ensure a better quality of life, both material and emotional, for your loved ones, then just maybe, romance won't be something we only get to read.